Princess Elena had spent 25 years of her life behind golden walls. Every morning she woke up to the same routine: royal breakfast at 8 sharp, etiquette lessons at 9, language practice at 10. Then came the endless meetings with potential husbands from other kingdoms. Her mother, Queen Isabella, had one dream for her daughter: a perfect royal marriage. But Elena had other plans. She was tired of princes who only talked about their horses and hunting trips. She was bored with fancy men who couldn't have a real conversation about anything meaningful. The annual harvest festival was happening in the main village, just outside the palace walls. For weeks, Elena had heard the servants talking about the colorful decorations, the delicious food stalls, and the cheerful music that filled the streets. She wanted to see it all with her own eyes, not from her bedroom window. On that crisp autumn morning, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She put on simple clothes, a plain brown dress and a worn-out cloak that belonged to one of the kitchen maids. She tied her long hair back with a simple ribbon and rubbed some dirt on her hands to make them look like she worked hard for a living. Sneaking out of the palace was easier than she thought. The guards were busy with their morning duties, and the servants were preparing for the day ahead. Elena slipped through the garden gate and walked quickly toward the village. The festival was even more amazing than she had imagined. Colorful banners hung from every building. The smell of fresh bread and roasted apples filled the air. Children ran around laughing and playing games. Musicians played happy tunes on street corners while people danced and clapped along. Elena was so busy looking around at everything that she didn't watch where she was walking. She bumped right into someone carrying a large basket of apples. The basket went flying, and bright red apples rolled everywhere across the cobblestone street. "Oh, no, I'm so sorry," Elena said, immediately dropping to her knees to help gather the scattered fruit. The person she had bumped into was a young man with kind brown eyes and dirt under his fingernails. Instead of being angry, he just laughed. "Don't worry about it. These things happen at busy festivals." His name was David, and he was visiting from a farming community 3 days away. He had come to the festival to learn about new farming techniques and to sell some of his family's best produce. David had gentle hands from working in the fields and a warm smile that made Elena feel comfortable right away. "You must be hungry after all that apple chasing," David said with a grin. "Want to share some lunch with me? I've got fresh bread and cheese that my sister made." Elena had never eaten simple food like this before. In the palace, every meal was served on golden plates with fancy sauces and complicated preparations. But sitting on a wooden bench with David, eating bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, tasted better than any royal feast she had ever experienced. David told her about his work helping farmers grow better crops. His eyes lit up when he talked about finding new ways to help plants grow stronger and healthier. He explained how he traveled from village to village, teaching people simple tricks that could double their harvest. "What about you?" David asked. "What kind of work do you do?" Elena had prepared for this question. "I help my father with his business," she said carefully. "We deal with people from different places, trying to solve their problems." It wasn't really a lie. As a princess, she did help her parents deal with people and their problems, just not in the way David probably imagined. They spent the whole afternoon walking through the festival together. David showed Elena things she had never seen before: how to tell if fruit was perfectly ripe just by touching it, which flowers made the best natural medicine, and how to identify different types of grain just by looking at them. Elena found herself fascinated by David's knowledge. He knew so much about the real world, about how ordinary people lived and worked. He talked about farmers struggling with bad weather and families working together to survive difficult times. These were stories Elena had never heard in the palace. As the sun began to set, they found themselves sitting by the village fountain. David pulled out a small wooden flute and played a simple, beautiful melody. Elena had heard the best musicians, In the kingdom, perform in the palace, but nothing had ever sounded as lovely as David's simple tune under the evening stars. "This has been the best day I've had in years," Elena said honestly. "Mine too," David replied. "You're different from other people I meet. You really listen when someone talks, and you ask questions that show you actually care about the answers." Elena felt her heart beating faster. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. In the palace, people agreed with everything she said because she was a princess. But David was talking to her like she was just a regular person, and she loved it. When it was time to go, David walked Elena toward the edge of the village. "Will I see you again?" he asked hopefully. Elena wanted to say yes immediately, but she knew it was complicated. I come to this area sometimes. Maybe we'll run into each other again." "I hope so," David said. "I'll be staying in the village for a few more weeks, helping the local farmers prepare for winter planting." As Elena walked back toward the palace in the darkness, she couldn't stop thinking about David's kind eyes and gentle laugh. For the first time in her life, she had met someone who made her feel like herself. Not a princess, not a political tool, just Elena. That night, lying in her royal bed, surrounded by silk curtains and golden decorations, Elena stared at the ceiling and smiled. She had tasted something she never knew existed, genuine connection with another person, and she knew she had to find a way to experience it again. The next morning brought the usual routine of royal duties, but Elena's mind kept wandering back to the festival, to the simple lunch shared on a wooden bench, and to the sound of David's flute playing in the evening air. She had discovered something precious, and she wasn't ready to let it go. Winter came early that year, but Elena barely noticed the cold. For 6 months, she had been living 2 completely different lives. During the day, she played the perfect princess, attending royal meetings, learning diplomatic languages, and entertaining visiting nobles. But every chance she got, she would slip away to the village where David was working. Their friendship had grown into something beautiful and deep. David taught Elena about the cycles of nature, how to read the weather and cloud patterns, and why different plants grew better in certain soils. Elena, still pretending to be a merchant's daughter, shared her knowledge about people and problem-solving, though she had to be careful not to reveal too much about her royal education. They would meet at the old stone church on the hill, where David often went to think and plan his farming projects. Sometimes they would walk through the dormant fields while David explained his plans for spring planting. Other times they would sit by the fireplace in the village inn, talking for hours about their dreams and fears. Elena had never felt so alive. With David, she could laugh without worrying about royal protocol. She could ask questions without someone immediately agreeing with her because of her title. She could even disagree with him about things, and he would listen to her arguments and sometimes change his mind based on her ideas. David was falling in love too, though he didn't realize he was falling for a princess. He loved how Elena asked thoughtful questions about everything. He admired how she seemed to genuinely care about the problems of ordinary people. When he talked about struggling farmers or families facing difficult times, Elena would get tears in her eyes and ask what could be done to help them. "You have such a good heart," David told her one snowy evening as they walked back from visiting a family whose roof had collapsed. "Most people with comfortable lives don't really care about others who are struggling." Elena felt a sharp pain in her chest when he said this. She did have a comfortable life, more comfortable than David could ever imagine. And here she was, lying to him every single day about who she really was. The truth came out on a cold February morning in the worst possible way. David had gone to the village market early to buy supplies when he heard the sound of horses and trumpets. The royal procession was coming through the village, something that happened only once or twice a year. David joined the crowd of villagers lining the main street to watch the beautiful carriages pass by. The golden royal coach was magnificent. pulled by 6 white horses and decorated with silk banners that fluttered in the winter wind. As the coach drew closer, David could see through the crystal-clear windows. His heart nearly stopped beating. There, sitting in the royal coach wearing a crown and elegant blue dress, was Elena. His Elena, the woman he had been meeting secretly for months, the woman he had fallen completely in love with. Elena saw David in the crowd at the exact same moment. Their eyes met through the carriage window, and she watched his face change from curiosity to shock, to something that looked like betrayal. She wanted to jump out of the coach right there in front of everyone, but the procession couldn't stop for anything. That evening, Elena managed to slip away to their usual meeting place at the church. David was there, sitting on the stone steps, staring at his hands. He looked up when she approached, and Elena could see the hurt in his eyes. "Princess," he said quietly, and the words sounded strange and formal coming from his lips. "I'm still me," Elena said, sitting down beside him on the cold steps. "I'm still the same person you've been talking to all these months." David shook his head slowly. "Are you? Because the person I thought I knew was honest with me. She told me about her life, her family, her work, but none of that was real, was it?" Elena felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "My feelings for you are real. Everything I told you about caring for people, about wanting to help solve problems, that's all real. I just couldn't tell you about the crown and the palace and all of that." "Why?" David asked, and there was real pain in his voice. "Didn't you trust me?" "It wasn't about trust," Elena tried to explain. "It was about, for the first time in my life, someone was talking to me like I was just a regular person. Not because they wanted something from me, not because they were afraid of offending royalty. You liked me for who I am, not what I am." David stood up and started pacing back and forth in front of the church. "But I don't even know who you are. I thought you were someone I could, someone who might want to build a simple life with me. But you're a princess. You live in a palace. You're going to marry some prince from another kingdom and rule over thousands of people." "I don't want to marry a prince," Elena said firmly. "I want to be with you." David laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Elena, I'm a farmer. I work with my hands. I live in a small cottage and own 3 chickens and a goat. Your breakfast probably costs more than I make in a month. How could this possibly work?" They sat in painful silence for a long time. Elena wanted to tell David that none of those things mattered to her, but she could see that they mattered to him. His pride was hurt. He felt like she had been playing a game with his feelings. "I need time to think," David finally said. This is too much to understand all at once." Elena nodded, though her heart was breaking. "I understand. But David, please remember that every moment we spent together was real for me. Every conversation, every laugh, every time I told you how much I cared about you, all of that was the truth." David looked at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him struggling with his emotions. "I believe that," he said softly. "But believing it and knowing what to do with it are 2 different things." As winter turned into spring, Elena threw herself into her royal duties, but her heart wasn't in it. She attended meetings about trade agreements and diplomatic relationships, but all she could think about was David working alone in the fields, probably wondering if their entire relationship had been built on lies. David struggled too. He had taken on extra work helping farmers in distant villages, partly to stay busy and partly to avoid the places where he and Elena used to meet. But everywhere he went, he was reminded of their conversations. When he saw families struggling with problems, he remembered how Elena would get that determined look in her eyes and start brainstorming solutions. 3 weeks passed before they saw each other again. Elena was visiting a village that had been hit by flooding, doing her royal duty of assessing the damage and promising royal aid. David was there too, helping farmers replant their ruined fields. They worked side by side all day, not talking about their personal situation, but focusing on helping the flood victims. Elena watched David organize the replanting effort with patience and skill. David watched Elena talk to worried families with genuine compassion and practical problem-solving ideas. By evening, they were both exhausted and covered in mud, but the village was on its way to recovery. As they washed their hands in the village well, David finally spoke. "You really do care about these people," he said, not looking at her. "I always have," Elena replied. "That part was never pretend." David nodded slowly. "I can see that now. And I can see that being a princess doesn't make you less caring. Maybe it makes you more able to actually help people. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start." They both realized that their love was real, even if the circumstances were more complicated than either of them had imagined. The question now was whether love could be strong enough to bridge the enormous gap between their two worlds. Spring brought new hope to the kingdom, and slowly, Elena and David began rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. But they both knew that loving each other was only the first challenge. Making that love work in the real world would be much harder. Elena came up with a plan that seemed almost impossible, but it was their only chance. She convinced her father, the king, that the kingdom needed a special advisor for agricultural matters. The recent floods had shown how important farming was to their people's survival, and they needed someone who really understood the land and the farmers' needs. "Father, we have advisors for war, for trade, for diplomacy," Elena argued during a private dinner. "But we don't have anyone who understands how our people actually survive day to day. We need someone who can help us make better decisions about farming, food storage, and rural communities." The king was a practical man who genuinely cared about his people's well-being. After thinking about it for several days, he agreed that this made sense. "Do you know someone qualified for this position?" he asked. Elena's heart pounded as she answered. "Yes, I do. There's a young man named David who has been helping villages throughout our kingdom. He's incredibly knowledgeable, and the farmers trust him completely." David was hesitant when Elena first suggested the idea. He didn't want people to think he was getting the job just because of his relationship with the princess. His pride had been wounded when he learned about Elena's true identity, and he was determined to prove himself on his own merit. "I don't want charity," David told Elena firmly when they met at their favorite spot by the old church. "If I'm going to work at the palace, it has to be because I'm actually good at the job, not because you're trying to help me." Elena understood his feelings. "Then prove it," she said. "Take the job and show everyone that you deserve to be there. Show them that you can make a real difference for our people." David accepted the position, but he made it clear that he would earn his place, through hard work, not through any special treatment. He moved to a small cottage near the palace and threw himself into his new responsibilities with determination that impressed everyone around him. His first major project was developing a plan to prevent future flood damage to the kingdom's farmland. David spent weeks traveling to every affected village, talking to farmers, studying the land, and working with local leaders to understand exactly what had gone wrong and how to fix it. The solution he proposed was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of building expensive walls to keep water out, David suggested creating a network of channels and ponds that would direct floodwater to areas where it could be stored and used during dry seasons. It would cost less than traditional flood barriers and would actually help farmers during droughts. When David presented his plan to the royal council, even the most skeptical advisors had to admit it was excellent. The plan showed deep understanding of both farming and water management, and it would save the kingdom thousands of gold pieces while protecting their food supply. Elena watched from the back of the council chamber as David answered questions about his proposal. She felt proud seeing how confidently he explained technical details and how respectfully he listened to concerns from the older advisors. This was the man she had fallen in love with. Intelligent, caring, and completely dedicated to helping others. Over the following months, David's reputation grew throughout the palace and the kingdom. He didn't just sit in meetings and give advice from a distance. He continued to work directly with farmers, getting his hands dirty and solving real problems. When a mysterious plant disease threatened the wheat crop, David worked day and night to find a natural solution that saved the harvest. The palace staff began to respect David for his work ethic and his kindness. He treated everyone the same way, whether they were high-ranking nobles or kitchen servants. He remembered people's names, asked about their families, and always had time to listen when someone needed help. Elena and David had to be very careful about their personal relationship. They couldn't be seen spending time alone together, and they certainly couldn't show any romantic feelings in public. But they found ways to be together while maintaining professional appearances. Sometimes Elena would ask David to escort her on official visits to farming villages. They would travel in separate carriages, but work side by side once they arrived, helping families and assessing local needs. These trips gave them precious time together while serving their people. Other times, they would happen to be in the palace, library at the same time, researching different topics but sitting at nearby tables. They would exchange quiet smiles and occasionally help each other find books, stealing moments of connection in the middle of their busy days. The hardest part was pretending they were just colleagues when they were around other people. Elena had to resist the urge to touch David's hand when he was explaining something she found particularly clever. David had to stop himself from staring at Elena when she was being especially kind to someone who needed help. Their secret relationship became an open secret among some of the palace staff. The older servants, who had worked there for decades, had sharp eyes for romance. They noticed how Princess Elena seemed happier than she had ever been, and how the new agricultural advisor always volunteered for any task that involved working with the princess. Most of the staff approved of what they suspected was happening. They could see that David was a good man who genuinely cared about the kingdom and its people. They also noticed that Princess Elena had become more interested in the daily lives of ordinary citizens since David's arrival. But not everyone was supportive. Some of the younger nobles whispered that it was inappropriate for a princess to spend so much time with a commoner, even a respected one. They complained that David was getting too much influence over important decisions, and they questioned whether someone from his background could really understand the complexities of royal politics. Elena heard these whispers, but she didn't let them discourage her. She could see how much good David was doing for their kingdom. Crop yields were improving, farmers were happier, and the royal council was making better decisions about rural policies because they finally had someone who understood these issues from the ground up. After a year of working together professionally, David and Elena had built something stronger than just romantic love. They had become true partners in serving their people. They complemented each other perfectly. Elena understood politics and diplomacy, while David understood practical problem-solving and the needs of working families. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens discussing plans for next year's planting season, David stopped beside a fountain and pulled something from his pocket. It was a ring, but not the kind Elena might have expected. Instead of gold and jewels, David had woven together strands of strong grass into a beautiful, simple band. "This represents everything I believe in," David said quietly, looking into Elena's eyes. "Growth, renewal, the cycles of nature, and the beauty of simple things that last. Elena, will you marry me?" Elena's heart filled with joy as she looked at the ring and then at the man she loved completely. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." They both knew that accepting his proposal meant facing the biggest challenge of their lives, but they also knew that their love had already survived discovery, doubt, and a year of careful secrecy. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The announcement of Princess Elena's engagement to David sent shockwaves through the entire kingdom. Within hours of the official proclamation, urgent messages were flying between noble houses, foreign embassies, and royal courts across neighboring kingdoms. Nobody could believe what they were hearing. Queen Isabella paced back and forth in her private chambers, her silk dress rustling with each angry step. She had always been proud of her daughter's intelligence and kindness, but this decision seemed like complete madness to her. "Elena, do you understand what you're doing?" the Queen demanded when her daughter came to speak with her. "For 800 years, our family has maintained power through careful marriages with other royal families. You're throwing away centuries of tradition for what? A farmer with dirt under his fingernails?" Elena stood her ground, though her heart was pounding. "Mother, David has proven himself. He's helped our kingdom more in 1 year than most nobles do in their entire lives. The people respect him, the farmers trust him, and he's saved us more money than any previous advisor." "That's not the point," Queen Isabella snapped. "Marriage isn't just about love, Elena. It's about alliances, about securing our kingdom's future, about maintaining respect from other royal families. What will they think when they hear our princess married a commoner?" The Queen was right to be worried. Letters were already arriving from neighboring kingdoms, and none of them contained congratulations. Prince Alexander from the Eastern Kingdom, who had been hoping to marry Elena, sent a furious message claiming that the royal family had insulted him personally. The wealthy Duke of Northlands threatened to cancel several important trade agreements, but the worst reactions came from within their own kingdom. Lord Benedict, who controlled the largest army outside of the royal forces, called an emergency, meeting with other powerful nobles. They gathered in his grand estate, whispering angrily about how this marriage would weaken the entire royal system. "If a princess can marry anyone she wants, what's to stop our own children from running off? With servants or merchants?" Lady Catherine complained. "This sets a dangerous example that will destroy the natural order of society." Lord Benedict nodded grimly. "More importantly, it shows that our royal family no longer values the alliances that have kept us safe for generations. Other kingdoms will see this as weakness. They might even consider it an invitation to attack us." Meanwhile, David was facing the worst treatment of his life. Threatening letters arrived at his cottage daily. Someone threw rocks through his windows 3 times in 1 week. When he walked through the palace corridors, groups of young nobles would stop talking and stare at him with open hostility. The worst part was that David started to doubt himself. Maybe everyone else was right. Maybe he really was just a simple farmer who had gotten too big for his place in the world. Maybe Elena would be better off with someone who actually understood royal life and could help protect the kingdom through important marriages. "Perhaps I should leave," David told Elena one evening as they met secretly in the palace gardens. "Look at all the trouble this is causing. Your own mother won't speak to you properly. The nobles are planning who knows what kind of rebellion. Maybe everyone would be happier if I just disappeared." Elena grabbed David's hands and looked directly into his eyes. "Don't you dare give up on us now. Yes, this is difficult. Yes, people are angry. But David, look at what we've accomplished together. The kingdom is stronger because of your work. The people are better fed and safer because of your ideas. That's what really matters." But the pressure kept building. Foreign princes began arriving. Unexpectedly, each claiming they just happened to be passing through and wanted to pay their respects to the royal family. Prince Theodore from the southern islands brought expensive gifts and spent hours talking to the king about military alliances. Prince William from the Mountain Kingdom offered to help defend against any threats from rival nations. The message was clear. Elena could still choose a more appropriate husband if she came to her senses. The situation reached a breaking point when Lord Benedict and several other powerful nobles demanded a formal meeting with the king. They didn't openly threaten rebellion, but their meaning was clear enough. "Your Majesty," Lord Benedict said smoothly, "we've served your family loyally for generations, but we're concerned that this marriage decision shows poor judgment that could endanger our entire kingdom. Perhaps the princess needs more time to consider the serious responsibilities that come with royal marriage. The king listened to their complaints and demands with a stone face, but Elena could see the worry in her father's eyes. He was caught between supporting his daughter's happiness and protecting the stability of his kingdom. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the village lights in the distance, and thinking about all the ordinary families who just wanted to live their lives in peace. They didn't care about royal marriages or political alliances. They cared about having enough food, safe homes, and hope for their children's futures. David couldn't sleep either. He sat in his small cottage, reading over his agricultural reports, and thinking about all the projects he had planned to help improve life for farming families. If he left now, who would continue that work? Would the next advisor understand the real needs of rural communities? The crisis deepened when spies reported that 2 neighboring kingdoms were moving troops closer to the borders. They claimed it was just routine training exercises, but everyone knew better. They were testing to see if the royal family's internal problems had made the kingdom vulnerable to attack. Queen Isabella used this news to make her strongest argument yet against the marriage. Elena, people might die because of this decision. If we appear weak and divided, our enemies will take advantage. Is your personal happiness worth risking the lives of innocent people? For the first time since the engagement announcement, Elena felt truly shaken. She had been so focused on proving that love could overcome social barriers that she hadn't fully considered the political and military consequences. The weight of potential responsibility for future conflicts pressed down on her like a heavy stone. David was going through his own crisis of conscience. Late one night, a messenger brought him a letter from his family back home. They had heard about his engagement and were terrified for his safety. His younger sister begged him to come home before something terrible happened to him. The letter made David realize how much danger he had brought not just to himself, but to everyone he cared about. His family was receiving threats, too. Villages where he had worked were being told they might lose royal support if they continued to speak well of him. Elena and David met in their secret spot by the old church, both carrying the heavy burden of knowing that their love story had become a political crisis that was affecting thousands of people. "Maybe we're being selfish," Elena said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe love isn't enough when so many other people could get hurt." David pulled her close, and they held each other in the darkness, both wondering if they were about to lose everything they had fought so hard to build together. The storm was raging around them, and they couldn't see any way through to calmer skies. Just when everything seemed hopeless, help came from the most unexpected place, the ordinary people of the kingdom. The news of Princess Elena's engagement troubles had spread beyond the palace walls, and in villages across the land, people were having their own conversations about what was happening. In the market squares and village halls, farmers and merchants were talking about David's work over the past year. They remembered how he had saved their crops from disease, how he had helped them prepare for floods, and how he had always treated them with respect and kindness. Old Thomas, who owned a small wheat farm outside the capital, stood up at a village meeting and spoke words that would change everything. "I don't know much about politics," he said, "but I know that young man David saved my farm last year when nobody else cared. If the princess loves him, and he's been good to our people, then why shouldn't they be happy together?" His words sparked something powerful. Other farmers began sharing their own stories about how David had helped them. Maria, who ran the village bakery, talked about how Princess Elena had visited during the floods and had worked alongside everyone else, getting her hands dirty and really caring about their problems. Within days, something extraordinary began happening across the kingdom. People started writing letters, not to complain, but to support the royal couple. Simple families who had never written to the palace before picked up their pens to tell their stories. The letters poured in by the hundreds. A family from the Eastern villages wrote about how David's new irrigation system had saved their farm from drought. A group of young farmers wrote about how Princess Elena had helped them get loans to buy better equipment. An elderly couple wrote about how both Elena and David had visited their sick grandson and brought medicine when they couldn't afford it. But the most powerful support came in a way nobody expected. The people decided to take action themselves. On a bright morning in early summer, groups of farmers, bakers, blacksmiths, and merchants began walking toward the capital city. They weren't angry protesters. They were people who wanted to show their support for two individuals who had shown them kindness and respect. By afternoon, hundreds of people had gathered peacefully in the main square outside the palace. They weren't demanding anything or making threats. They simply held signs with messages like, "Thank you, David," and "Princess Elena cares about us," and "Love brings people together." Queen Isabella watched from her window as the crowd grew larger and more diverse. There were old grandmothers holding hands with young children, tough-looking farmers standing next to delicate seamstresses, and people from every corner of the kingdom coming together with one message. They supported their princess and the man she loved. The queen called for her advisors, but when they looked out at the peaceful gathering, even the most traditional counselors had to admit they had never seen anything like it. These weren't rebels or troublemakers. These were loyal citizens who simply wanted to express their gratitude and support. That evening, letters arrived from even more distant places. Agricultural communities in neighboring kingdoms, where David had shared his knowledge during travels, sent messages praising his character and expertise. Scientists and farming experts from faraway lands wrote to say that David's innovations were being used successfully in their own countries. The turning point came when Elena's elderly grandfather, the former king, asked to speak with her privately. He had been watching everything unfold from his quiet retirement, and his words carried special weight because of his years of experience. "Elena," he said gently, "I've seen many marriages in my time. Marriages for politics, marriages for money, marriages for power. But I've rarely seen a marriage that brings out the best in both people the way yours does. You and David make each other better, and together you make the kingdom better. That's worth more than any political alliance." The former king's support gave Queen Isabella the perspective she needed. She realized that her fears about tradition and political consequences had made her forget the most important tradition of all. Rulers should serve their people, and the people were clearly speaking in favor of this marriage. Foreign kingdoms began changing their attitudes too. When they saw the genuine popular support for Elena and David, they realized that opposing this marriage might actually make them look bad. Several neighboring rulers sent new messages, apologizing for their earlier harsh reactions and offering congratulations instead. Prince Alexander, who had been so angry about Elena's engagement, wrote a surprisingly gracious letter admitting that he had been more interested in political advantage than in Elena's happiness. He wished them both well and offered to maintain friendly relations between their kingdoms. Queen Isabella made her decision on a warm summer evening. She called Elena and David to meet with her in the royal garden, where she had first taught Elena about flowers and responsibility years earlier. "I owe you both an apology," the queen said, looking at Elena and David with new respect. "I was so worried about protecting old traditions that I forgot about creating new ones. You've shown me that love, when it's combined with service to others, can be the strongest foundation for any marriage, royal or otherwise." The queen announced her support for the marriage in a public ceremony that drew thousands of people to the palace grounds. She spoke about how the kingdom was strongest when it honored both tradition and progress, both wisdom and love. The wedding ceremony itself became a celebration unlike anything the kingdom had ever seen. Instead of the usual formal affair limited to nobility, Elena and David decided to hold their wedding in the largest public square, inviting everyone who wanted to attend. People came from every corner of the kingdom. Farmers arrived with wagons full of flowers from their fields. Bakers brought fresh bread to share with everyone. Musicians played songs that mixed traditional royal melodies with folk tunes that ordinary people loved to sing. David's family traveled from their distant home, nervous but proud to see their son marrying for love. They were welcomed warmly by the royal family and by the common people who had come to celebrate. The ceremony blended traditions from different cultures and social classes. Elena wore her grandmother's royal crown, but she also carried a bouquet of simple wildflowers that David had picked for her. David wore formal clothes, fit for a royal wedding, but he also wore his grandfather's simple wooden ring alongside the grass ring he had made for Elena. As the sun set on their wedding day, Queen Isabella approached the happy couple during the celebration. The square was filled with people from every level of society, nobles dancing with farmers, children playing while their parents shared food and stories, and musicians playing songs that brought everyone together. "Who is that beside you?" Queen Isabella asked Elena with a smile, looking at David as he helped an elderly farmer find a comfortable place to sit. Elena looked at her husband, who was now deep in conversation with a group of village children who were asking him about growing vegetables in their family gardens. Her heart filled with love and pride as she answered. "My husband," she said, her voice clear and confident. "He's human." The queen smiled and nodded. "Yes, he is. And that's exactly what our kingdom needs." As the celebration continued into the night, Elena and David stood hand in hand, surrounded by their people, not subjects to be ruled over, but partners in building a better future for everyone. They had proven that love could indeed conquer not just personal obstacles, but social ones as well. Their love story had become something bigger than romance. It had become a symbol of hope, showing that when people choose understanding over prejudice, cooperation over conflict, and love over fear, everyone benefits. The kingdom entered a new era, one where leadership was measured not by bloodlines or political connections, but by genuine care for people and dedication to making life better for everyone. And at the center of it all was a princess and a farmer who had dared to believe that love could change the world.